This is one of a series of Good Answers presentations, offering evidence to answer skeptical challenges to the Bible's accuracy. We look today at the book of Daniel and the last days of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. That empire was certainly in trouble. In the late 500s B.C., a new player had emerged on the international stage, the Medo-Persian Empire, led by Cyrus, whom the historians would call the Great. His armies had defeated the Babylonians and had reached the gates of the capital. But here it seems that they were stalled. As many know, the city of ancient Babylon was considered virtually impregnable, its walls and gates protecting it from any army, no matter how powerful. The Ishtar Gate, which we see here in an artist's representation of the city, has actually been reconstructed for the benefit of the tourist trade. Lacking the means that gunpowder and cannons would provide in later centuries, an ancient army would have been hard put to breach Babylon's walls. The book of Daniel tells us of just this time, with Cyrus of Persia at the head of his army outside, but Belshazzar, safe within, so confident that he was holding a party, an immense one, for 1,000 guests. Daniel's account gives us a sense of the atmosphere as the evening progresses. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Not only praising the wrong gods, but even drinking from the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had plundered from the temple in Jerusalem years before. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall, near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. Daniel 5:5 and 6. Rembrandt's famous painting here captures the king's reaction. Bewildered and fearful, Belshazzar called out for an explanation. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple, and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Daniel 5, verse 7. But his advisers had nothing to offer. That's not surprising. Like most people in the ancient world, they saw events in terms of omens. The shape of a cloud or the behavior of an animal could be meaningful. Losing an article of clothing or having a chance meeting with a friend could portend good luck or bad. The Babylonians were past masters of this approach and possessed long lists of omens and their presumed meaning. But for these words, they came up empty. Then the account goes on to tell us that the queen mother reminded Belshazzar that in the days of his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, there had been a wise man named Daniel who could unravel the mysteries of the gods. Belshazzar may have been reluctant to consider Daniel a Hebrew, since his guests had just been profaning sacred vessels from the Hebrew temple. But he's desperate, so he calls for Daniel, and the interpretation is provided for him. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Daniel 5:26-28. These words, as it happens, are all Aramaic terms associated with money. Mene is related to the Aramaic word for to count, so God has summed up Belshazzar and his reign. Tekel is related to the verb to weigh, so God has weighed the king and found him inadequate. And Perez, the plural of the word farsin, means to divide. And not only that, but Perez is very close to the Aramaic word, the term for the Persians, so the word does double duty. Belshazzar's kingdom is divided, and, by a pun, the recipient will be the Medes and Persians. Assembling it all, Daniel gives the king his prophecy of doom, and the Bible goes on to tell us that on that very night the city was taken by the Persians, and Belshazzar was slain. A dramatic story, and one that liberal scholars have often dismissed as pure fancy. After all, it appears in a book of the Bible that has been attacked for centuries. As early as the 3rd century A.D., a Phoenician philosopher named Porphyry argued that the book of Daniel was written about 165 B.C., long after the 500s B.C. when Daniel lived. Porphyry pointed out that the prophecies in the book were so accurate and specific that they could only have been written after the fact. Recall Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the huge image, with head of gold, chest of silver, lower torso of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. A stone cut from the mountain supernaturally strikes the image on its feet, causing it to crumble, and the stone grows to fill the earth. Daniel explains this image as picturing 4 world empires: Babylon, which will be supplanted by Persia, overthrown in turn by Greece, and Greece in its turn replaced by Rome. He describes these empires without actually naming any but the first, but his words fit so well with what we know of history that Porphyry, and many others since his time, have argued that the passage could only have been written after the rise of Rome. Its composition, then, can only have come in the 2nd century B.C., and not in the 6th. And there have been other reasons for skepticism about the book. The Greeks, with their love for history, preserved king lists for Babylon, right down to the end of that empire. Those lists showed Nebuchadnezzar, and then Nabonidus, as the last kings, with no mention of Belshazzar. So it was that scholars challenged the book's validity. Ferdinand Hitzig, in his 1850 commentary on Daniel, flatly stated that King Belshazzar never existed, and the book of Daniel was essentially fiction. That set the tone for later generations of scholars, as the New World Encyclopedia summarizes. Most modern biblical scholars maintain that the book was written in large part during the mid-2nd century BCE, and that most of the predictions of the book refer to events that had already occurred. New World Encyclopedia, online edition, Daniel, Book of. But even as this scholarly skepticism was growing until it became the norm, archaeology was gradually revealing a different picture. It began with the British consul John George Taylor excavating in southern Iraq, in Ur, the Bible Ur of the Chaldees, where Sir Leonard Woolley would excavate many years later. Taylor came upon several clay-fired cylinders from the temple of the moon god, Sin. The cylinders recorded restoration done on the temple by the orders of King Nabonidus. The record included the king's prayer to the moon god for himself and his son, Belshazzar. Belshazzar's name and their relationship both appear in the text. Now, Nabonidus was a strange fellow. He was devoted to the moon god, almost to the exclusion all the other gods in the Babylonian pantheon. Unhappy with life in Babylon, he had withdrawn from his capital city and spent the last 10 years of his reign at the oasis of Tema in the Arabian desert. The opinion of Cyrus, king of Persia, of this arrangement, with Nabonidus off in the desert and his son in charge of Babylon, was clear. One of Cyrus's decrees states, "A weakling has been installed as the ruler of his country. He interrupted in a fiendish way the regular offerings. The worship of Marduk, the king of the gods, he changed into abomination." Weak or not, Belshazzar was ruling in place of the actual king. We see this from legal documents of the period. Such documents normally included an oath taken by the parties in the name of the god Marduk and of the king. But from this time, we see documents that say, "I swear by Marduk, Nabonidus, and Belshazzar." This is a very unusual pattern, one that is not attested for any other ruler, and shows that Belshazzar was considered almost an equal to his father, the king. But still, the book of Daniel refers to Belshazzar as king, not crown prince, not regent, but king. And skeptical commentators down to this day charge that this is an error. Is it? We might have thought so until 1979, when something happened in Syria. A peasant was plowing his field, and the plow struck a rock. Not an ordinary rock, though, a stone statue. It was an image of a provincial governor, and on his skirt was an inscription in 2 languages. It comes from the period when Assyria ruled the region, and the languages are Assyrian and Aramaic. In the Assyrian text, the person is called governor of Gozan, but in the Aramaic, he is called king of Gozan. Now, Assyrian was the language of the empire and its overlords, while Aramaic was the language of the common people. Obviously, then, to the rulers of Assyria, this man was their provincial governor, but to the people of that province, he was effectively the king. This evidence explains, I believe, Belshazzar's position in Babylon. To his father Nabonidus, he was governor, but to his subjects, he was king, just what the book of Daniel calls him. With the help of this recent evidence, we can understand another detail of Daniel's account. Remember what it says? "The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, 'Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom.'" Why doesn't he offer to make Daniel 2nd in the kingdom? Now we can see why. Belshazzar himself is 2nd in the kingdom, and 3rd highest is the best he can offer. So then, a long-time puzzle has a solution after all. For almost 2,000 years, students have questioned the date of the book of Daniel. Its prophecies seem just too good to be genuine. And in looking at details, the scholars have fueled that skeptical attitude. Daniel calls Belshazzar a king when we know he was not. But archaeology has now shown that this language was precisely accurate. By the people of Babylon, he was addressed as king, though only governor by his father's appointing. And to further confirm the narrative's accuracy, we find Belshazzar offering to make Daniel only 3rd highest in the kingdom, the best that a provincial governor could give, no matter how grateful he was. And as for the rest of the story, well, we learn that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. Daniel 5:30. We may say now, though, that he, though he is dead, still speaks, to remind us that the Bible was right all along. If you have questions or comments about this lecture, or any others in the Good Answers series, you may direct them to me, Dr. Jerry C. 4 at yahoo.com.